You may remember last year when we were in Anaheim, we were talking about this idea of innovation and innovation as a capability, innovation as a differentiator, innovation as a difference maker for you in the workplace. But I'm going to let you in on another secret. I gave you one last year. I'll give you another one this year. Innovation in the absence of boldness is futility. Now, what do I mean by that? When we are innovators, all the great breakthroughs, the ideas, kind of med-info concepts that you might have, initiatives, all those fall by the wayside if we can't boldly support, if we can't take bold actions or have a bold move to make it happen. Innovation means nothing without the ability to be bold. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. We're going to spend our time talking a little bit about what is boldness, how do you do it, what are some of the habits of boldness, and then be prepared. We're going to give you a boldness action template. Yes, a template, but the template's just a holding place. It's the ideas. And I can promise you, I have used it myself. It's not some empty, vapid practice that some consultant came up with. I've been in your shoes, and these are things I found to be useful, but more on that in just a bit. So maybe you're not picking up what I'm laying down yet about boldness. So I went out in advance of this talk, and we spoke to 150 people. Well, surveyed, kind of talked, but we did some qualitative as well. And we wanted to understand in your organization, why is it important for you as a leader to be bold? So here's what people told us. You're more likely to get recognized. You're more likely to be respected. You're more likely to get things done. We know bold people are doers and is viewed as executors. You're more likely to get those plum assignments that you want. And of course, wait for it, you're more likely to get promoted. You know, they say that the meek inherit the earth, but I think the bold are more likely to become an executive director, but that's just me. So, you know, these are some of the observations of people in the survey who are senior life science leaders, but we went beyond that. We went back and we looked at some other research. This came out of the Journal of Applied Psychology. And in that journal, what they found was people who are less bold or perceived to be self-acknowledged less bold versus people who are acknowledged to be much bolder. Those who are bolder are twice, more than twice as likely to be viewed as effective, to get successful outcomes. So it's not just promotability, it's perception, it's outcomes, it's the view to success. Boldness begets opportunities. Boldness unlocks innovation and potential. So if you're buying what I'm selling here, let's talk about what is boldness then. You know, when I thought about it, it's kind of this term that we throw around boldly, but we don't always define. Is it bravado, like this guy sticking his head in the mouth of a lion? Maybe lunacy, or is it boldness? Is it bravery? Somebody who stands up in the face of injustice, putting their own self at risk without fear, in the absence of fear or worry? Or is it confidence, the ability to stand up in front of thousands of people, to deliver a keynote with prying eyes staring at you, waiting on that next punchy line at a TED Talk? Could be any of those. And Merriam-Webster, this is what they said: a willingness to take risks and act with confidence. Now, I like that definition. I think that's a good definition, but I just don't think it's enough. Boldness is not necessarily a singular thing. It's not one definition. Merriam-Webster can put a bold definition for boldness, but that's not the epitome of what it is. To me, it's multifaceted. And the 5 things that I think of with boldness: speaking out to inspire people to do important things, to do more than they ever thought they could do, to move people is a part of boldness. Taking a risk to do what you believe is just and good, even when the environment is against you, even when it's the most personal risk that you can take to do what you know is right. Zigging when everyone else is zagging, going against the grain of business wisdom, of intellectual wisdom to say that I have a view, I have a vision, I'm going to bring people along with me. It's consistently performing when the pressure is on. It's easy to prognosticate. It's easy to inspire people when you don't have to do it consistently in front of the lights. And of course, it's leading by example and taking personal action. It's great to tell people space travel is the future, but how about you risk your own personal wealth to make it happen? No one of these people are the epitome of boldness. Some more than others, as we can see, we have diverse opinions on it, and that's important. But I think it's each one of these pieces that make up what boldness is all about. But there's one more thing which I think is really important, and I'm going to share that with you in just a moment. But before I do, you may be thinking now, am I bold? What stops people? What stops me from being bold? How could I be more like Rosa Parks? How could I be more like Churchill? How could I be more like Elon Musk? Maybe you don't want to be more like Elon Musk, but what stops us from being bold? So I went back and I asked that same group of people, what do you think? What do you think gets in the way? And what's interesting is a lot of people just didn't know. I don't know what stops me from being bold. I haven't thought about it. But there was a pretty big subset of people who had thought about it. And what they said was really revealing. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't feel comfortable speaking without all the data. It's hard for me to be bold if I don't have all the answers at my fingertips. Spoiler alert, you will never have all the information. Sometimes we have to act. Often we have to act with imperfect information. I don't want to look foolish. I don't want to appear as an imposter for my role or for what I do. And the one that really caught my eye was this. It's not me. It's not my personality. I am not a bold person. That's not who I am. I'm a CPA. I actually was a CPA, by the way. I'm a CPA. I work in MedInfo. I'm a statistician. My job is in the background. I don't need to be bold. I'm not bold. So don't ask me to be bold. It's not who I am, and I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. But here's the thing. We all have the potential to be bold. It's a habit. It's not a thing. It's a habit that we cultivate and that we can develop. We're going to talk about how you might be able to do it. But I want to just give a little bit more context. I want to give my own personal story, and I'll give this to you in a quick summary. But about a dozen years ago, I had this epiphany about boldness. At the time, it was the winter of 2012. I was working in New York City for Pfizer. And while I was working for Pfizer, I was the head of this brand, Chantix. I'd been in the role for just a matter of about 3 or 4 months. And our operating plan, our brand plan that we had to turn in, had some upside opportunities, but they didn't want to hear them yet at this point. So the executive leadership team was looking for money in the couch, so to speak, and they said, we are going to hold a Shark Tank in 1 month. Every brand, you're going to be asked to present a big, bold idea, something that we haven't seen that has big upside potential that maybe was too big of a risk for your operating plan. And I was excited because we did have one of those ideas. You see, a gentleman on my team, he was a marathon runner and he ran the New York City Marathon. And he said, you know, running a marathon is a lot like quitting smoking. I know that may sound kind of a funny analogy, but it's all about the sponsorship and the community around you that enables you to succeed. When you run a marathon, if anyone's run one before, you may know that the preparation and during, you can have your friends and family support you and sponsor you financially, emotionally, supportively. And we felt it was the same thing in the quitter's journey. It's a lonely experience. If you go bring the community around them to support them in their quit journey, that could be a difference maker. So we were excited and we put together a concept called the gift of quit. We spent hours, late nights working, doing research, building out the concept. We built out not just an app, but a whole go-to-market strategy. And we were confident we had a killer idea. Well, our idea was selected to be one of the top 5 in the finalists, and we had a chance to present to this executive committee, which included the president and his executive leadership team. And we had 5 minutes to present, 5 minutes to answer questions. My colleague came in and she gave the initial delivery of 5 minutes. And you may have had this experience before where people are staring at you completely mirthlessly. There is not a smile, not a moment of acknowledgement, and you know it's not going well. And after the 5 minutes were up, there was an opportunity to potentially to save the day, to close, to really put a stamp on this and tell them why they needed to fund this. So when it came to me, with myself sweating through my shirt and anxious, and they asked me, what do you have to say? I recited some market research. I talked about a financial model, and I said I thought it was a wise investment. All that was safe. Not one bit of it was bold. And you could probably guess what happened. A few hours later, we got an email that said project was dead. They decided not to fund us. And I knew in my very fabric, my very being, I hadn't been bold. In fact, what I knew more than ever in that moment was that while I was prepared, while I was ready, while I was confident that we had the right information, when the moment availed itself, I had not prepared or practiced to be bold when the light was shining on me, when I had to say something that was important, to move people to feel and act differently. I couldn't do it. I didn't do it. And it was disheartening. And this is my takeaway from this. Boldness isn't a lone act. It's not a genetic trait. It's not written in the stars or in your DNA. It's a habit. We form habits. We develop them over time through deliberate practice. I had not done it, and that's why I failed. And I spent the better part of a year reflecting on it, trying to figure out what and how I could do things differently. P.S. After spending a year mulling over this and thinking about this and practicing this, I had another opportunity to be able to pitch the idea to a subset. That idea got funded. That idea got approved, albeit on a smaller scale. But that idea succeeded, killing it in the Russian market, over 200% of goal. But it never would have happened if I didn't stop and go back and say, how do I cultivate the habits of being a bold leader and a bold visionary inside a team? So you may be wondering, well, what are those habits? Lay them on me. I want to know what they are. Well, you've heard some of them before, but I'm going to go a level more than just an inch deep. So the 4 habits of bold leadership, there are 4 that I wanted to specifically focus on. And I'm going to do this with sharing some examples and stories. So the first one is this: boldness is undergirded with leading with inspirational purpose. What does that mean? Purpose drives culture. Purpose drives belief. You saw that with the story a little bit with Winston Churchill, but I want to give another example. It's a little bit higher in the ether. It goes back in the political realm. President John F. Kennedy. Now, what you may not know, or maybe you know a bit about, 1962, new president, spotlights on him, a lot of political pressure. And what happened just a few years before was that the Soviets put their first satellite or unmanned mission into space called Sputnik, 1957. And that satellite was a game changer. What it signaled, not just to the president, but to the world, was that the Soviets were ahead of the United States, that they were ahead of us militarily, that we were falling behind from a technology standpoint. So Kennedy faced some significant headwinds. He went to his advisors and he said, I want to put a man on the moon before the decade is over. What does his advisor say to him? We can't do it. We don't have the technology know-how. We don't have the prowess. We don't have the political might or will to do this. We're very fragmented. So President Kennedy did what any real person who brings inspirational purpose to the game does, and is bold. He got in front of more than 40,000 people in September 1962. At Rice Stadium in Texas, he addressed not just 40,000 people, but a televised audience in the United States Congress. And here is what he said. I'm going to roll some video for you. Ready? Here we go.
There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
It's a rousing speech. We do things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. We do the things that are hard. This bold vision that he put out there, what did it do? Well, number one, the US Congress gathered together and they funded what would become an expansion of NASA. They would get every man, woman, the civil service to focus on putting a man on the moon. And as you probably know, 1969, Neil Armstrong, well before the decade was over, walked on the moon. But what's more impressive, although Kennedy would never see it that day, wouldn't live to see that sweltering day brought up something else. He created a bold vision that many people, from janitors to senators to scientists, could believe in. And while the story may be a bit apocryphal, President Kennedy was out visiting one of the NASA sites, supposedly in Houston, and he approached the man while he was on the tour, who was obviously a janitor, and he said to him, "Sir, what do you do here at this NASA facility?" And the janitor replied, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." And it's that kind of bold vision. It's that purpose that drives people to do more. It helps you be more bold when you infuse purpose in an inspiring way in what you ask people to do, whether it has to do with MedInfo, whether it's a technology program, whether it's any sort of political treatise. It's all about bringing purpose to the table. I want to bring one more quick example, totally different domain. This guy's name is Don Berwick. Don heads up something called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. What's interesting about Don, he's a Harvard researcher, a pediatrician, and his whole mission was about eliminating unnecessary medical errors in the hospital setting. You may know this, there's hundreds of thousands of purportedly preventable deaths because of medication error or because of clinical or surgical error. And he made it his mission. He said, this is not the fault of just individuals. It's the fault of the system. So he did research, he published, he had studies, and he could not move people to do a darn thing. So in 2004, in the December, he was at a major healthcare conference. And as he faced the crowd, he said a couple of things that I think really bring this idea of purpose and specificity to be able to get people to do something that others would not normally do. So I'm going to roll the videotape again. This may be one you haven't seen before. So let's go to the videotape.
I'm losing my patience. Maybe it's my age, maybe it's my emails, maybe it's people who keep telling me what's wrong with their care. Maybe it's the word of Honor Page, who spoke at our forum last year, the mother of Annie Page, who has cystic fibrosis. When I asked her what she most wanted healthcare to hear, Honor said to me, "Tell them the clock is ticking for Annie." Or maybe it's the hope that I find in your work, in the work that so many of you in this room are doing every single day to improve care. You're doing so much, so well. You're putting the actual transformation within the reach, and now we need to grab it. And I'm losing my patience. So here's what I think we should do. I think we should save 100,000 lives. I think we should do that by June 14th, 2006, 18 months from now. Some is not a number, soon is not a time. Here's the number, 100,000. And here's the time, June 14th, 2006, 9 a.m.
Wow. When I first read this and saw this, it really struck me. The specificity and the boldness. Here's a number. There are 100,000 lives at stake, and it's up to you. You have this amount of time, and you need to take action. You might want to know, P.S., there, according to their analysis, 120,000 lives were saved. They're able to reduce error in a significant way, which would never have happened if he didn't get up on the bully pulpit and have his say. In his words, some is not a number, soon is not a time. Boldness sometimes is not just infusing with purpose, but purpose and specificity. How do you create purpose and drive people with something that's measurable and specific? I love this story. I love this example because it's something we can do. It's something every one of us can do when we face the need to take a bold action. The second thing I want to point to, and you heard this before, is about leading through example and personal action. Sometimes it's not enough to be like Don and stand up, or JF Kennedy to be in front of people and to make a speech. Sometimes we have to lead through our own actions and model for people what the change is in the world that we want to see. So I can think of no better example than this gentleman, Dr. V, Dr. Venkataswamy. Now, if you don't know Aravind Eye Care, you got to look it up later. They are the single largest eye care provider in the world. And it didn't start out that way because this gentleman, he was an ophthalmologist in 1976 in southern India, I believe in Chennai. And one of the things that he was looking straight at was that he was about to retire, and there were millions of people that suffered from preventable blindness, most of which was caused by cataracts, which really shouldn't cost that much money to do a procedure on, but it was far out of the reach of everyday people. So while he was facing retirement, and he could have gone off to the pasture and played golf, relaxed, been with his family, he decided, no, I'm going to double down on something I believe in. Preventable blindness is something that he thought using modern, systematic technology could change the game, but none of this existed in India at the time. And he felt that there was a need to create a healthcare system that focused just on this particular need. So Dr. V took his home and he mortgaged it. He got his siblings to mortgage their homes. They sold their engagement jewelry, their family jewels, literally their family jewels, and took that money and used that as a seed capital to form the foundation of what would become the first building at Aravind Eye Care. They put everything into it. That is an example of personal commitment and action. It's one thing to have a bold view. He could have said, I'll work for a non-governmental organization, an NGO, or I'll do some philanthropy or fundraising and enjoy my retirement. But no, he put everything he believed in and took all of his life savings and even greater, that of his family, to support this vision. So of course, if it was a failure, I probably wouldn't be telling you this story. He took this idea of assembly line technology that he borrowed from the fast food industry, McDonald's, which he spent time studying, and said, what if we combine McDonald's and their technology with doing this with eye care? You'd probably be happy to know they've done more than 35 million outpatient procedures, 4 million surgeries inpatient. They have a line of experts who were uneducated originally in the communities acting as trained ambassadors and frontline healthcare workers. They've pioneered some of the most cutting-edge technology that we borrow today here in the eye care world in the United States. And all that, they have lower infection rates than our top hospitals here in the United States. All that was accomplished because he inspired people, doctors who could have gone abroad and worked in Europe or the US or somewhere else, stayed right there in India because they believed in this purpose. And they believed it because of his personal action and his example. As he said, we're going to eradicate avoidable blindness no matter how rich or poor the person may be. And he put his own wealth into it to prove it. Making eye care as efficient and affordable as getting a cheeseburger at McDonald's. That was his vision. And that's actually what is the miracle of what Aravind is today. Now, I'm going to give you one more example, an interesting one that always struck me. Now, if anybody is interested in gastroenterology, you'll love this story. Dr. Barry Marshall, Nobel Prize winner in 2005, started out in Australia and working with a microbiologist, and he started to notice that when people got gastric ulcers, that the way to treat it and the conventional wisdom was it's up here. It's psychosomatic, nervousness, anxiety. Maybe you've seen, like, remember like old movies where like the dad or the mom or the professional is all stressed out and they're taking a bottle of Pepto-Bismol because they're so getting an ulcer from it. Don't worry yourself. You're going to get an ulcer. That was the conventional wisdom. That's what industry said. That's what all of the medical professional institutions said. Marshall, in the early 80s, said that's not true. It's caused by bacterial infections. He was laughed at. He was laughed out of conferences, literally. He was labeled a quack. And he decided, well, I'll do some animal models to prove it. Generated data, showed people, worked with some microbiologists, and they said, that's fine, but that's not true. They ignored it, dismissed it out of hand. So he wanted to do a human study, but couldn't get an approval for his human study. So he did probably what was almost unthinkable. From this little cartoon that somebody produced in Australia about his trials and travails, what did Dr. Marshall do? He took a beaker full of broth. He infused it with H. pylori, the bacteria. He swallowed it down, and they spent the next 3 days waiting. I'm getting myself sick thinking about it. He spent the next 3 days waiting and getting nauseous and vomiting. And then he made sure to do a gastric exam and to look at, to confirm that he was getting a gastric ulcer. After 3 more days of suffering, he decided to administer an antibiotic and to show the progression of resolution. It still took another year. People still didn't accept it, but eventually it was on the radar. And in 2005, not only did he change medical practice, he won the Nobel Prize, which to him was the side note. The big note was he changed the way people thought. And this, to me, is a great example of personal action and leading by example. It's probably maybe an extreme version. I'm not recommending people go out and poison themselves or risk their lives to be able to prove that they're bold. But it's a great way to emphasize the importance of personally committing to what you believe is important. And there he is with his Nobel Prize in 2005. The second to last habit that I want to talk about is challenging the status quo. And to do that, I'm going to go to a completely different world yet again, outside the medical institution. And we're going to talk about Sara Blakely. Now, if you don't know Sara Blakely, she's an amazing person to be able to find out about and learn her story. She was Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. And she did this all starting out as selling fax machines by day and doing stand-up comedy at night. You see, Blakely, like many other women, experienced that undergarments and clothes were almost always traditionally made by men, but for women. Going back to the days of the garment districts, the garment district in 1950, to pretty much to the 21st century, women didn't have a big say in designing. Companies like DuPont and others developed nylons and pantyhose, and they designed it many times without really listening or considering what women want and what their experience is. Well, Blakely wanted to and needed to look professional, but also wanted to be comfortable. And she found what was made for her was maybe not like this, but not far off in terms of undergarments. She said it just wasn't made for her. So somebody who had not taken a business class in her life, had never worked in the garment industry, decided to challenge the status quo. So at the time, the status quo was that women are forced to choose between comfort and appearance. So she said, what if you could make undergarments that were both fashionable and comfortable? Now, it sounds like a provocative thought. It's a bold idea. How do you make that happen? Here's where the boldness came in. She decided one day to go out to buy a couple of pairs of pantyhose and cut the feet off of them. She then tried them on and said, there's something here. She did mock-ups. She invested her entire life savings This is a 21-year-old who was selling fax machines, had no experience in this, and decided to roll the dice. And she said, there's a way to break the status quo on this. She drafted, she designed, she did over 100 prototypes right there in her living room apartment. People saw this and they said, interesting idea, but it's never going to work. She brought it to investors. She brought it to her IP attorney who said, I could drop the patent for you, but honestly, it's not even worth you spending the money because it's a terrible idea. He really said that. In an interview, the IP attorney said, yeah, I did say that. I thought it was a terrible idea. She was flying in the face of convention. It was something that was dominated by men. It was something that was long, the travails of working in the titans of the textiles and garment industry. How can an outsider come in and shake up the very foundation of an industry? She had no right to do that. Well, she did. She went on, became successful early on. Oprah became a huge champion of Sarah Blakely and of the company Spanx. It became one of the biggest companies out there, over 300 lines of product. It sold just about a year or so ago to BlackRock for over $1.2 billion. I mean, almost lose your breath thinking this, over $1 billion. And she hasn't left the company yet because she still thinks there's an opportunity to revolutionize and still break the status quo. This is a person who never took a business class, who never knew anything about the garment district or the garment industry. And she decided it's time to break the status quo. So sometimes being bold is about seeing what everyone else is seeing, but thinking what no one else is thinking. Challenging the status quo. And in the words of General MacArthur, you're remembered not for the rules you follow, but for the ones that you break. So what rules can you break? When you're thinking about how to be bold, what are the rules or conventions, the status quo that you can challenge? All right, last piece, preparation. I saved the best for last because I do believe while all those characteristics and then some are very important habits to cultivate, this to me is the most important. Preparation. As I found out personally, those who don't prepare end up not being bold and not delivering when the time matters because you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know when you need to be bold. So prepare for bold risk-taking. One example that I love here that brings it to life is this guy, Philippe Petit. Now, this may sound like an outlandish example, but listen to it for just a few moments. Petit was also known as Man on Wire. He was a French high wire act. He was probably most famous for traversing the World Trade Center between the two towers in the 1970s, but he did many more. The Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, Notre Dame, you name it. Now, you may be thinking, yeah, but this guy's an aerialist. He's a daredevil. What does that have to do with being bold? Yeah, he's bold, but that has nothing to do with me. Well, in a moment, I'll explain to you why. But if you've never heard of him, you've never seen him, it's probably worth it to see this old footage from 1970-ish or so when he traversed the World Trade Tower. So I'm going to roll video one more time and share with you why exactly he is bold.
It started out as another routine morning for a New York helicopter traffic reporter, but he had more to tell his radio listeners than how the traffic was on the West Side Highway.
I'll tell you what, I have a very queasy feeling in my stomach right now because I'm at, let's see, 1,500 feet. And up here at 1,500 feet or in that area, there is somebody out there in a tightrope walk between the two towers of the World Trade Center, right at the tippy top.
That somebody was Philippe Petit, a 24-year-old Frenchman, doing his higher wire act 1,350 feet up and no net below. He and some associates managed to hide out in the World Trade Center towers overnight, and early this morning rigged a 140-foot steel cable between the two buildings using some sort of crossbow device. Petit enthralled hundreds of people below, prancing about for more than an hour. But police in the audience decided Petit was better off in a police station, handcuffed securely to a chair.
Why did you do this? That's the thousand why in this morning. There is no why. Just because when I see a beautiful place to put my wire, I cannot resist.
Sergeant Charles Daniels, who talked Petit off the high wire, called it a first-rate performance.
He was bouncing up and down. His feet were actually leaving the wire, and then he would resettle back on the wire again. and then he would go down on one knee, and he'd balance his hand pole and lay down on his back and put his hands behind his neck and just completely relax and swing one of his legs over the wire in a carefree manner.
Was he laughing and smiling?
Well, not when he would do that. He would just lay there and relax as if he wanted to just take a little nap.
As spectacular sights go, how would you rate this one?
Supreme. The apex of excitement.
Wow. Just seeing that makes me a little bit nauseous and gets me a little bit nervous. I don't like heights. I could not imagine sitting there dangling above the World Trade Center more than 1,300 feet above the ground. Now, you might say, like, yeah, but this guy, he's wired for this. But here's what he said in one of his interviews. I'm not a risk taker. You're not? I'm not a risk taker. My preparation is so thorough that nothing is left to chance. You see, Petit didn't see risk in this, not because he was delusional, not because he's mentally ill, but because he prepared in such a way that his boldness took over. There was not a moment of fear or uncertainty. Well, let me explain just a little bit more. Petit had done many different walks, Notre Dame, Niagara Falls, Grand Canyon. In every case, there was a high-level degree of preparation. In fact, this is a picture of him in his backyard in Paris or in the suburbs of Paris. And what Petit would do is he designed this contraption to go from 2 feet all the way up to 30 plus feet. He would simulate the experience from wind to undulating the wire to creating every possible scenario. He had a team of people working with him to try to not just simulate, but really recreate the exact experience. He didn't stop there and just practicing. Practicing is great, but he delved into the deep, deep details. His blueprints would have blueprints. His calculations had calculations. He would design every single element from doing calculations to measuring out the wind speed of when was the precise time that he should take this bold endeavor, this risk. He even went so far as getting a surveyor wheel to be able to measure the exact calculations of the World Trade Center, to be able to take a helicopter, to be able to fly above and to survey it. He believed that no stone unturned, and that by doing the right level of preparation, you build the habit of boldness. It is not an individual act. It's not something in his DNA, although perhaps maybe more so him than most. It's something that you can prepare for. Practice and habit and preparation are the secret recipe for boldness. In the words of this gentleman, Don Hudson, he said, the antidote to fear is preparation. Well, I think the antidote for not being bold is preparation. It's the ability to very methodically and thoughtfully design your boldness plan. So those are the 4 habits. Just to recap them for you: lead with inspirational purpose, example in personal action, challenge the status quo, and prepare for bold risk-taking. But there is one last thing. So that template, you could throw it away and say, I don't need to do this. Boldness is a habit. It's not easy. I'll be the first to tell you that I have my more than fair share of regrets of looking back and saying, I wish I had been there and done it differently. But with my mind's eye, looking back a dozen years ago, the best thing that could have happened was to have failed at that moment. Because that failure wasn't a failure of me. It wasn't a failure of my character or of my DNA or my ability to be able to do things differently and to be bold. I hadn't practiced. I hadn't built a habit. You don't learn to drive a car by jumping in the car as a 16-year-old, getting your learner's permit, and just stepping on the gas. It doesn't work that way. Why would it work that way with being bold? I can assure you that being bold is something that you can cultivate, that you can work on. If anybody would like to reach out afterwards, I'm happy for you to reach out to me. Happy to share my 2 cents with John, with the team and the board here. Take advantage of the people that you're working with inside your company and outside in this organization. This is an opportunity to be more and do things bold. You don't have to be a president or a prime minister or a tennis star or a billionaire mogul. You could just be you. I'll leave you with this last thought. This gentleman, one of my favorite writers of all time, Mark Twain, had said, boldness isn't the lack of fear. It's acting in spite of it. We all have fear. We do it not because we don't have fear. We do it, we're bold because we're doing it despite the recognition that we have those fears and still being a better version of ourselves anyway.